When natural disasters strike, every minute counts. In recent years, emergency responders have increasingly turned to artificial intelligence to coordinate evacuations and allocate resources. But beneath the promise of technological efficiency lies a troubling reality. These systems consistently fail certain communities. Today, we explore how the algorithms powering disaster response create patterns of digital invisibility and what's being done to ensure no one is left behind when they need help most. In July 2024, as Hurricane Beryl tore through Jamaica and parts of Mexico, emergency response teams weren't just relying on traditional methods. Behind the scenes, sophisticated AI systems process vast amounts of data. Satellite imagery showing structural damage, social media posts from affected residents, and demographic information to identify vulnerable populations. These machine learning algorithms have become increasingly common in global disaster management, promising greater efficiency and faster response times to communities in crisis. The International Emergency Management Consortium estimates that 76% of major disaster responses now incorporate algorithmic resource allocation. These systems represent the cutting edge of humanitarian technology, designed to save lives by optimizing limited resources during chaotic emergency situations. But as we'll see, this technological revolution comes with hidden costs. Recent research has uncovered a disturbing pattern in how these AI systems perform. Dr. Amara Okafor and her team at the University of the West Indies analyzed response data from 3 recent Caribbean hurricanes and made a startling discovery. Areas with limited digital infrastructure received assistance an average of 37 hours later than digitally connected regions with similar damage profiles. The reason? What Dr. Okafor calls digital visibility. Communities that generate less digital data become functionally invisible to algorithmic decision-making. Emergency management agencies increasingly rely on what disaster technologists call digital exhaust, the trails of information generated through cellular networks, social media posts, and internet-connected devices. The problem occurs in what researchers term data deserts, communities with limited digital footprints due to economic factors, infrastructure limitations, or cultural practices. A 2023 study by the Pacific Disaster Center found that rural communities in developing nations generate approximately 1/14 the digital data of urban centers during crisis events. This isn't merely a technical glitch. It represents a fundamental equity challenge that affects real lives during their most vulnerable moments. This digital disparity creates a dangerous feedback loop. As Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka of the Tokyo Institute for Crisis Informatics explains, areas that generate less data receive delayed assessment, which leads to delayed aid, which further reduces their digital visibility during the recovery phase. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a computational sociologist at the University of California, has documented how this invisibility extends beyond the immediate emergency. Communities that receive delayed initial response often experience cascading disadvantages throughout the recovery process. Their needs are systematically underrepresented in post-disaster datasets that inform future preparedness initiatives. The consequences are measurable and severe. Analysis of recovery outcomes following Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico showed that communities in the lowest quartile of digital connectivity experienced 22% higher rates of long-term displacement and received approximately 40% less per capita recovery funding, despite equivalent damage assessments when manual surveys were eventually conducted. This creates a vicious cycle where the most vulnerable communities become increasingly marginalized with each successive disaster. The issue extends beyond simple technical limitations. The fundamental architecture of disaster response algorithms often encodes Western assumptions about communication patterns and help-seeking behaviors. Dr. Lucia Fernandez, who studies disaster equity at Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, points to the algorithmic preference for explicit requests. Many indigenous communities rely on collective problem-solving rather than individual calls for assistance. Their cultural response patterns make them systematically undercounted by current algorithms. This technological bias creates what some scholars have termed algorithmic colonialism, the imposition of digital systems that inadvertently penalize non-Western modes of community organization. The Mexican government's recent Atlas emergency response system deployment during Hurricane Beryl demonstrated this problem. Communities in Quintana Roo that actively posted on social media received assessment teams within hours, while equally damaged Mayan communities with limited digital presence waited days for equivalent attention. The algorithmic bias manifests in subtle ways beyond simple response timing. Dr. Kwame Nkrumah of the African Disaster Preparedness Institute has documented how AI-driven needs assessment tools consistently underestimate the importance of communal infrastructure in rural African communities. The algorithms prioritize individual household damage over community structures like shared water systems or gathering spaces central to resilience in collectivist societies, Nkrumah explains. Even the metrics quantifying successful disaster response reveal embedded cultural assumptions. Standard evaluation frameworks emphasize individual household recovery rather than community cohesion or cultural continuity, values that may hold greater importance in many non-Western contexts. These biases aren't necessarily intentional. The algorithms powering these systems weren't designed with explicit discriminatory intent. Instead, they evolved from models originally developed for commercial applications like targeted advertising and consumer behavior prediction. Their adaptation to humanitarian contexts occurred rapidly, with limited critical examination of underlying assumptions about data availability and communication patterns. Recognizing these disparities, disaster technologists are developing new approaches. The International Red Cross recently launched its Equitable Response Initiative, incorporating cultural anthropologists in algorithm design and deliberately oversampling data from historically marginalized communities. Meanwhile, researchers at Carnegie Mellon University's Disaster Innovation Lab have created Equity, an algorithmic framework that explicitly corrects for digital visibility bias by incorporating historical patterns of underreporting. The solution isn't abandoning algorithms, says Equity's lead developer Dr. Mei Zhang. It's building systems that recognize their own blind spots. Some of the most promising innovations come from affected communities themselves. In the Philippines, the Disaster Risk Reduction Network has developed a hybrid approach that combines traditional community reporting mechanisms with digital interfaces. Village leaders use simple feature phones to report standardized damage assessments collected through in-person networks, ensuring communities maintain agency in the reporting process while generating the digital signals that algorithms require. The United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction has begun implementing algorithmic impact assessments before deploying new technologies in vulnerable regions. These assessments evaluate potential disparate impacts and require mitigation strategies before implementing systems in the field. Some disaster response organizations have begun addressing these questions by adopting formal ethical frameworks for humanitarian technology. The International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies recently published guidelines requiring all digital tools to undergo equity testing with representatives from potentially affected communities. The challenge of algorithmic bias in disaster response raises more profound questions about the ethics of humanitarian technology. As Dr. Sophia Chen of the Digital Humanitarian Ethics Project argues, we're not just designing algorithms, we're designing power structures. The question isn't simply whether our technology works efficiently, but who it works for and whose values it encodes. The consequences of algorithmic bias in disaster response are not theoretical. They're measured in human lives and community well-being. The analysis of Hurricane Maria's aftermath in Puerto Rico provides a stark illustration. Communities with lower digital connectivity not only waited longer for initial help but continued to experience disadvantages throughout the recovery process. The 22% higher rate of long-term displacement means families separated, children changing schools, and communities fractured. The 40% less per capita recovery funding translates to infrastructure that remains unrepaired years later, businesses that never reopen, and generational wealth destroyed. During Hurricane Beryl's impact on Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, this pattern repeated itself. Tourist areas with high social media activity received rapid assessment and assistance, while inland Mayan communities with equivalent damage waited days longer, despite being more vulnerable due to pre-existing economic factors. These disparities don't just affect immediate survival. They shape long-term recovery trajectories and community resilience for years to come. Addressing these hidden biases becomes increasingly urgent as climate change increases the frequency and severity of natural disasters. The emerging consensus among experts suggests that truly equitable disaster algorithms must be co-designed with affected communities rather than merely deployed to them. This co-design approach is already showing promise. In Jamaica, following Hurricane Beryl, emergency management officials partnered with community leaders from historically underserved areas to redesign their response protocols. They created a hybrid system incorporating traditional communication networks with digital reporting mechanisms, ensuring that communities without robust digital infrastructure remained visible to response algorithms. The next generation of disaster response technology must balance efficiency with equity, ensuring that help reaches those in need, regardless of their digital footprint. This will require not just technical innovation but a fundamental rethinking of how we measure success in humanitarian response. As climate change makes disasters more frequent and severe, the systems we build today will shape vulnerability patterns for decades to come. The algorithms powering disaster response represent powerful tools that can save lives and speed recovery when natural disasters strike. But as we've seen, these systems can inadvertently create new patterns of vulnerability, leaving behind communities that don't generate enough digital data to be seen by AI systems. The digital divide becomes a life or death matter when disasters strike. The path forward requires technical innovation, cultural sensitivity, and a willingness to question fundamental assumptions about how technology should work in humanitarian contexts. By combining the efficiency of algorithms with the wisdom of affected communities, we can build disaster response systems that leave no one behind in their moment of greatest need. As climate change makes these disasters more frequent and severe, creating truly equitable response systems isn't just a technical challenge. It's a moral imperative. The future of disaster response isn't purely algorithmic or purely human. It's a thoughtful integration of both approaches, designed to respect the full diversity of human experience and ensure that help reaches everyone, regardless of their digital footprint. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for updates. Your feedback is appreciated. We hope to see you again.